A hunter found a deer with an enormous lump on its head. When he found out the reason, authorities sealed off the entire forest immediately. Mark Harrison was moving silently through a dense Wisconsin forest, tracking the faint signs of movement in the undergrowth. As he rounded a thicket of pine trees, he froze. Standing motionless in a clearing was a white-tailed deer. But something was terribly, grotesquely wrong. An enormous flesh-colored growth, a tumor the size of a basketball, bulged from the animal's neck and head, weighing its head down at an unnatural angle. This was not a simple injury or a natural deformity. This was a sign of a deep sickness, not just in the animal, but in the forest itself. This single horrifying discovery would trigger a full-scale environmental investigation, revealing a hidden invisible poison that had been seeping into the land for years, and a corporate crime so reckless it would force the entire forest to be sealed off as a hazardous zone. But before we start our story, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and hit that notifications bell so you won't miss any of our new incredible stories. To understand the terrifying secret that this sick animal was about to reveal, we must first understand the unseen world of industrial pollution and its silent, deadly journey through the environment. For much of the 20th century, in the rush for industrial progress, the disposal of hazardous waste was often an afterthought. Factories and manufacturing plants would simply dump their toxic byproducts into the nearest river, bury them in unlined pits, or release them into the air with little understanding or concern for the long-term consequences. This led to the creation of thousands of hidden toxic sites, a poisonous legacy that still haunts our modern landscape. While the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, in 1970 began to regulate these practices, the battle against illegal and irresponsible dumping continues to this day. The most insidious part of this problem is a process known as bioaccumulation. When a toxic or radioactive substance enters an ecosystem like a river, it doesn't just get diluted and wash away. It enters the food chain. The poison is absorbed by tiny aquatic organisms, which are then eaten by small fish. Then, larger fish eat the smaller fish. At each step, the toxin becomes more and more concentrated in the animal's tissues. A large predator at the top of the food chain, like a deer drinking from the water every day, can accumulate an incredibly high and dangerous dose of a poison that was present in the water in only trace amounts. The animals themselves become living, breathing reservoirs of the most toxic substances on Earth, and they are often the first silent victims of a poisoned environment. Quick pause here. If this story's grabbing your interest, tap like and subscribe. It really helps me keep bringing you these tales. They are the canaries in the coal mine. Their sickness, a warning that the land itself is sick. Our story's protagonist, Mark Harrison, was not just a hunter. He was a lifelong conservationist, a man who had spent decades in the forests of Wisconsin. He knew the land intimately and had a deep respect for the wildlife he shared it with. On that autumn afternoon, as he stared at the deformed and clearly suffering deer, his hunter's instinct was replaced by a profound sense of alarm. He had never seen an animal in such a state. He carefully backed away, took out his phone, and called the one agency he knew he had to, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the DNR. He described his location and the bizarre and disturbing condition of the animal. A team of wildlife biologists arrived at the scene a few hours later. They were able to locate the deer, which was still in the same area, struggling to move. The lead biologist, a woman with years of experience studying wildlife diseases, was visibly shocked by the size and aggressive nature of the tumors. But what happened next was even more alarming. As they began to survey the immediate area, they found another deer with a similar, though smaller, grotesque lump on its body. And then, a few hundred yards away, another. This was not a single sick animal with a random genetic mutation. This was an epidemic. There was a cancer growing in this forest, and it was affecting the entire deer population. The team knew they had a major environmental mystery on their hands. They made a critical decision. Instead of simply euthanizing the first deer for study, they decided to follow it. They wanted to see where it was living, where it was feeding, and most importantly, where it was drinking. They suspected that the source of the sickness had to be something the animals were all consuming, and the most likely culprit was a contaminated water source. For the rest of the afternoon, the team of scientists tracked the sick animal from a safe distance as it moved slowly and painfully through the trees. It eventually led them to its primary water source, a small, seemingly clear and pristine stream that wound its way through the heart of the forest. But as the biologists approached the water's edge, they immediately knew they had found the source of the horror. The water, which should have been clear, had a faint, unnatural, rainbow-colored sheen on its surface, the unmistakable sign of chemical contamination, and the air was filled with a faint but sharp and acrid chemical smell. They realized with a dawning horror that this beautiful, idyllic stream was not a source of life. It was a river of poison. The team of wildlife biologists stood at the edge of the stream, the beautiful sun-dappled water now looking sinister and menacing. They immediately began the careful and dangerous process of collecting evidence. Wearing protective gloves, they took multiple water samples from different points along the stream. They also took samples of the soil from the stream bank and the aquatic vegetation. They knew this was no longer just a wildlife disease investigation. It was now a potential environmental crime scene. The entire area was cordoned off with warning tape, and the samples were rushed under an emergency protocol to the state's primary environmental testing laboratory. While they waited for the lab results, the mystery of the deer's grotesque tumors hung heavy in the air. The scientists knew that for an entire population of large mammals to be affected so uniformly, they had to be exposed to a powerful and persistent carcinogen, a cancer-causing agent. And the most potent and aggressive carcinogens known to science are radioactive materials. When radioactive isotopes are ingested, for example by drinking contaminated water, they are absorbed into the body and can accumulate in the tissues and bones. These unstable atoms release damaging radiation which corrupts the body cells, causing uncontrolled growths and aggressive tumors, exactly like the ones seen on the deer. It was a terrifying theory, but it was the only one that fit the evidence. A few days later, the results from the lab came back. The water in the stream was heavily contaminated with a toxic cocktail of industrial chemical waste. But the most alarming finding was the presence of dangerously high levels of radioactive isotopes, specifically strontium-90 and cesium-137 byproducts commonly associated with industrial processes and substances known to be extremely carcinogenic. The scientists now had their answer. The deer were not just sick. They were suffering from radiation-induced cancers. The beautiful forest stream was a river of poison. The investigation immediately escalated. Now a major criminal case led by the state's Environmental Protection Agency. The mission was simple: follow the poison upstream and find its source. For several days, a team of environmental investigators in hazmat suits worked their way up the stream, taking water and soil samples every 100 yards. The concentration of the radioactive materials grew higher and higher as they got closer to the edge of the state forest. The trail eventually led them out of the forest and directly to a large, unassuming factory complex on a piece of adjacent industrial land. The factory had been in operation for decades. Hidden in a patch of thick, overgrown brush at the very back of the factory's property, they found it. A large concrete drainage pipe, illegally constructed and completely hidden from view, was discharging a slow, steady trickle of foul-smelling chemical-laced wastewater directly into the headwaters of the pristine forest stream. They had found the source. They had found the weapon. Armed with a search warrant and the damning lab results, a multi-agency task force raided the factory. When they confronted the factory's executives with the evidence, they confessed their motive was as simple as it was evil: greed. The proper legal disposal of the toxic and radioactive waste their factory produced was an incredibly expensive process. To cut costs and increase their profits, they had for years simply decided to dump it secretly into the nearby wilderness, showing a complete and utter disregard for the environment, the wildlife, and any humans who might live downstream. What followed was a massive multi-million-dollar environmental cleanup and a major criminal prosecution. The factory executives responsible were arrested and faced serious charges for their crimes. The affected section of the forest was sealed off from the public, a quarantine zone where teams of specialists began the long, difficult, and dangerous process of removing the contaminated soil and purifying the poisoned water. The story of the hunter and the sick deer is a powerful and sobering testament to the hidden dangers of our modern industrial world. It is a story about how corporate greed can create silent, invisible poisons that can devastate an entire ecosystem. But it is also a story of a quiet hero, Mark Harrison, the hunter, who, out of a simple sense of compassion for a single suffering animal, refused to just walk away. His single phone call triggered a chain of events that unraveled a massive environmental crime, brought the polluters to justice, and saved a beautiful and vital wilderness from further destruction. It is a profound reminder that the wild animals we share this planet with are more than just creatures of the forest. They are often the first silent sentinels whose suffering is a desperate warning that the land itself is in peril. Thank you for treading this trail of tales till we travel together again on another adventure.